Hey guys, Cloud here, and today I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to go kind of in depth as to every command and kind of what I think about its efficiency from my perspective of somebody who has been working with these commands since they came out. So we're going to be going over a bunch of commands that I thought were interesting or have some kind of efficiency problems or benefits, and going over which ones are better than other ones. And it's going to be kind of just based on my opinion. Again, this isn't something that I tested for each of these cases, but I've used these hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, in tons of projects where efficiency was a big deal, and I've kind of gotten a good sense for what's better than other things. But before we get into that, we have actually our first channel sponsor ever, so you know they gotta be good. So the sponsor for today is Revivenode Hosting. They are a Minecraft server hosting, and I believe they do some other game hosting. They feature a variety of different plans that I find are at a reasonable price. So what it offers is a pterodactyl daemon based server management system, which I think is one of the cleanest UIs I've ever used for server management. It tells you how much RAM you're using, it tells you how much CPU you're using, it tells you how much storage space you have and how much storage space you have left, which is something a lot of other servers don't do for you. So if you guys want to start hosting a server or even change server hosts, check out Revivenode Hosting. There is a promo code CLOUD in all caps you can use to get 20% off. And if you decide to go with them, let me know how it goes. And if you encounter any problems, they have a Discord where they're always willing to answer your questions and give you help. Okay, so getting back into it, we're going to start off with data modify entity, and this is in an arbitrary order. I literally just made these images, threw them in here in a random order that I didn't specify, and we're just going to go over them down the list, kind of in whatever order I feel most necessary. So first we have data modify entity. So this one, basically what you're doing with it is you're editing the MBT of some kind of entity or even block. And editing MBT is one of the least efficient things you can do. So this one's going down, I'm going to say in F. This is just F. We have to set some kind of a mood here for the whole, we have to set some kind of a baseline for what's good and what's bad. I'll do E. I'll throw it in E because I'm thinking of things in the future that are probably worse. So we'll put it in E. This is pretty much as bad as it gets when you're editing MBT, because MBT as a whole is something that's pretty expensive to deal with. You're opening arrays of data which are actually strings and you're parsing them and all that stuff. So if you can avoid editing a entity's data, do it. And if you have to edit an entity's data multiple times, try to limit how many times you're editing that MBT's data. Like, try and put all of your modifications in one place if possible. Okay, so second we're going to is forceload. So this one is kind of surprising. A lot of people might think that since you're making a chunk constantly loaded, it would be F, but it's actually not. I'm throwing it in the C category because forceload is surprisingly efficient for what it does. And you can have thousands. I have tested this and I have loaded, I think, 3,000 force loaded chunks just for the sake of copying a section that I have built somewhere else into a map where I can now destroy that. I actually never released that map, but maybe I will in the future. So anyways, it's surprisingly efficient, and it really depends on what's going on in the chunk. So it can be really efficient if what's going on in the chunk, there's maybe no entities and it's over the void and there's no buildings getting changed. But it can be less efficient if you have kind of players running through those chunks and entities and all kinds of stuff going on in them. So it really just depends. Like, it could be really bad or it could be really good. So that's why I'm putting it kind of in the middle. So next we have functions. So function you would think is S tier because it's just you run a function and it runs your commands. Boom, done, easy, good. But I'm actually gonna throw it at the I'm gonna throw it at the B tier. And the reason I'm putting it at the B tier is function actually has a lot of, I think you would consider it front end, but it has a lot of hidden things that it does that it doesn't necessarily need to do in the programming, but they included it. And what it does is it makes it more expensive than simply like calling something. It's more expensive than a function call in typical programming. If they did fix that, I would maybe throw it up at the A tier. It's somewhere in between here, but I'll just keep it at B tier. So next we have kill. So you would think that kill would be really efficient and good because you're getting rid of some of the entities, but I'm actually going to throw it down in the D tier because kill, what it has to do is it has to basically get rid of that entity, and the process of getting rid of the entity has a lot of background things going on, which can be laggy, and it kind of goes hand in hand with summon. So it actually goes hand in hand with summon. I think kill is more efficient than summon, but I'm going to put them next to each other anyway because they are related in the sense of summon is actually pretty inefficient because you have to create a new entity, and there's a whole process of loading entities onto a stack and background stuff that the game does that makes summon not as good as you would hope for. So what can you do to combat this? Definitely, if you ever have some kind of a situation where you want to use an entity that's some kind of midway point. So entity spawns in the center, and then I do some calculations on the entity, and then I don't need it anymore. Instead of summoning one for each player that you do the calculations and killing one for each player that you do the calculations, you can summon one at the first beginning or just summon one in general. Do the calculations to it using something else, such as TP, which I'm going to put at C tier, and we'll explain why. But do the calculations on that secondary entity, and just avoid the kill and summon altogether, or do the kill for one entity at the end and the summon for one entity at the beginning, and kind of pass it around between players, making sure that your logic makes sense and you're not accidentally doing two things at the same time. So yeah, that brings us to TP. TP is, I'm putting at C tier. It's pretty efficient of a command, but when you take it to servers, it starts to be really bad. If you use TP repetitively, really quickly, like with not a lot of time delay between when you do the TP, so let's say TP in a ticking function, if you do it to a player, they will actually freeze on the server because there's too many packets. And Minecraft has some kind of a server-side, vanilla server-side efficiency problem where if you update something's position too quickly, it will just keep it at the original starting position and throw that away until the updates are done. So until the TPing is done, which effectively makes it look like, let's say you do some kind of a recoil system with TP to knock their head back. It will not update where the player is standing until they're done spamming the weapon that it has the recoil. So I'll throw it at B. I'll give it a B. I'll give it a B because it's a little, that's very specific cases where it can have some issues with spam TP, but in general, it's pretty good. So next I'm going to go over the selectors. I want to get to them first because I have some selector modifiers listed above. But I want to get to the selectors themselves. So we have at A, at E, at P, at S. So at A, we're going to take this guy up to maybe a B tier. It's pretty good. What at A does is it takes every player that's online and throws them onto a list of people to do things to. This could be really good if there is not a lot of players, so a single player adventure map, no problem. But if you have a lot of people on a server, it can start having some built up kind of exponential costs. So if I do something that's at A and then I do some other stuff in an execute command and then I do something that's at A again, that'll basically create kind of an exponential amount. So if there was 3 players, then it'll do 3 to the power of 3 because you have each player on a list generating a list of each player. So you have some kind of exponential growth for how much kind of calculations you're doing. So next we have at E. At E, you are going down in the E tier for at E. What the at E does, or I'll throw it in the D tier. I'll put them in the D tier. That's fair. At E basically selects every entity. So if you have a lot of entities in your world, this is going to be really bad. So it's similar to at A, but it does all entities. Even if you modify it to say type equals player, it still is at E, so it still has to generate a list of every single entity. It literally, when you call a selector, it's generating a list of all those things. So yeah, that's not very nice to do unless you have to do it. Sometimes it's unavoidable, which is why I'm sticking it in the D tier. because there are cases where it's just unavoidable and you have to use it, and you just kind of accept that it's going to be bad. So next we have at P. At P is A tier. It's basically at A, but it picks one of them and the nearest player. So, and it's internal. It's similar to doing at A, limit equals 1, sort equals nearest, but it's just a lot cleaner to look at. But this should only pick, maybe, it might, I believe it still goes to all players and picks the nearest. But in the end, you're only doing commands for one player, which should be better than at A, unless you're in a single player world. Then we have at S. This is just S tier. At S is just S tier, because all it does is it says this. It just does the thing that you're already at. So it's only going to pick one entity, and it's going to be yourself, and it doesn't have to really generate a list. It already knows who this is. At S, S tier. Amazing. Okay. So now we can go back to the selector modifiers. So the first selector modifier is limit equals 1. And I would normally love to put this high, but this is actually going down to the D tier, C tier. It's gotta be C tier. It's gotta be middle. So limit equals 1 is kind of, the reason I put it here is it's kind of misleading. So what limit equals 1 does is it picks one thing from a list. But if you do at E limit equals 1, you're still having to generate a list of every entity in the world and picking one of the top one from the list. So you're still doing the process of generating the list, but you're only running the subsequent commands for one of them. So it's definitely better, but if in terms of fixing those kind of exponential growth of entity comparisons, but you're still going to everything. So you're not really fixing the efficiency of the original at E. Next we have MBT equals, this is F. MBT equals is F tier. I'm sorry. I use it all the time, but it is F tier. And what I want to kind of highlight here is I'm putting it in F tier mainly because it's probably not worse than data modify, but it gets used more often than data modify. More often than not, I will see people spam MBT equals selectors than data modify entity selectors. So it's going into the F tier because what it has to do is it has to usually go to at E or at A and check the MBT of that entity. So you have to go to each one, open their MBT, look if their MBT matches, which is a string / data kind of comparison, which is really expensive. So you should use as little MBT equals as possible ever. I typically get away with maybe 2 or maybe 3 or 4 constant MBT equals selectors. And then I sometimes do some more MBT equals selectors in sub functions that I know aren't running every tick. I will also occasionally run certain commands on a slower loop using schedule. And that's just because I know MBT is so expensive and I don't necessarily need to do that check every tick. I can do it every second or something like that. So just be really careful of MBT equals. So I'm just going to stick with these selectors. We have scores equals. This one is going to be A tier. It's not as good as something like, it really depends because you're only going to use scores equals usually in the case of having multiple entities like at A scores equals. So it's not as good as at S. It's not as good as something like execute if score, which would be above this, but I didn't include it in this list because it's similar to just scoreboard in general. But yeah, scores equals is pretty good because all you're doing is you're going to every entity in the list, which obviously is not going to be efficient. It's going to depend on your context, but you're comparing their scores, and scoreboard in general is very efficient. So checking if a score is a value is not too taxing on the system. Then you have sort equals. This guy, I'm just going to put it as C because it's not necessarily efficient. It's not necessarily not efficient. So sort equals is it's rearranging that list. So it really depends on how good their sorting algorithm is, which I really don't know. So I'm putting it as C. But what it does is you generate the list and then sort rearranges the list. So if you say limit equals 1, which means pick the first thing from the top of the list, that top of the list will change because you're changing the sort, the arrangement of them. Which could be, it's kind of either or. You're just rearranging a list. Then we have tag equals. Tag equals is B tier. Tags are not as good as scores in terms of efficiency. Usually tags aren't quite as good, but they are really fast in general. So don't be afraid to have a ton of tags. They're pretty fast. I would rather have some scores and do some more score stuff, but tags are pretty good. but again, it's still kind of string comparison to everything on the list, so just be careful how many tags you use, but they're pretty, you don't have to worry about them. So next is predicates. Predicates, I'm gonna throw them up at an A tier because what they do is they take a lot of inefficient things and make them efficient. So predicates can be used to replace MBT equals with a predicate check depending on what you're checking, because sometimes MBT equals is the only way to go, but sometimes predicates can replace them, in which case they will be faster. So predicates are very efficient compared to the counterpart that they use, such as some MBT checks or some scoreboard checks and removing a score with things such as detecting crouching or detecting jumping. Well, I don't think that predicates can detect jumping, but they can detect sneaking and other flags that usually you have to do some score stuff with. Then we got tell, me, and say. Oh, that's S tier. I mean, they honestly aren't super efficient. I mean, I would probably put them at A tier. They're pretty lightweight commands, but I'm gonna put them at S tier just because they're like the best way to get some quick output to know if something's running. So to know if if a function is working, you just throw a /say in there and you know it's not gonna affect your efficiency too much to just get a little say going compared to the alternatives. Then we have scoreboard. Oh, scoreboard's S tier. Without a doubt, scoreboard's S tier. Scoreboards have been optimized ridiculously for Minecraft, and they are really fast. I would rather do 50 scoreboard operations as compared to a couple data modifies. You know, scoreboards are really, really fast. They're probably the fastest command in the game in terms of whole commands. So those are great. Then we have fill, setblock, and clone. You are F tier, baby. Nah, I'll be nice. I'll put you in the E tier because people don't usually do them every tick. But fill, setblock, and clone can cause lighting updates, and lighting updates can cause the most lag in a game, period. So if you're causing a lot of lighting updates, it would be best not to have players in the region because then you're going to just lag. So that one's really bad. So then we have tellraw. Tellraw is going to get an A tier. For what it does, it is very efficient. You can get a ton of tellraws being spammed and you won't really notice any lag. I've done it before with menus. You can just spam those tellraw menus and you don't really notice significant entity lag from doing so. And they can portray a whole lot of information and interactivity with clicking, probably better than other UI-based menus in terms of a tellraw UI menu that uses mostly tellraws as well as functions and branches is going to probably be less laggy than something that uses some kind of chest or something of that sort, or entities, because those are going to require MBT equals. So tellraw is right up there at the top. It's really efficient for what it's used for. So next we have advancements. This is just advancements in general. These guys are S tier because they're like predicates, except when they can trigger, they don't require a command to run. So predicates require a command to run. Advancements can reward a command. So they basically do predicate stuff. They have more capabilities than predicates. There's a wider range of things using their triggers, such as using item. That one was added. That is really amazing. And it can increase efficiency. Maybe it's not incredibly more efficient than its counterpart, the counterpart way to detect some of these things, but it has a lot more capabilities. And it also cleans up your code nicely to just have an advancement that rewards a function. So you just know that function is going to be ran by the trigger as opposed to having to add commands to your tick function. So these ones are definitely good. I like them. Then we have as at S. This one is S tier, but I just included it as a joke here. As at S in execute does literally nothing. You are changing the person playing the command to the person playing the command. But I just like to include it. It is very efficient because you're literally doing nothing here. You're just replacing who's running the command to the person running the command, which might make it F tier because for what it's accomplishing, this is F tier actually. Because what it does is it does nothing. And what it costs is it probably costs something. So that's F tier because it does do something in the code, but it does nothing in your logic. So that makes sense. Then we have a hidden one. You didn't see it. Bossbar, I'm throwing down to D. I would put it at E, but I'm throwing it to D. I don't do a lot with boss bars, but I have heard from a lot of people that boss bars are actually pretty inefficient and laggy as a display method, and action bars are just better. I didn't include /title here, but it falls under the tellraw category as well. Then we have, hidden one, carrots. Carrots, I will throw at C tier because there is no alternative to using these things, but they aren't as efficient as tildes, but they are pretty good for what they do. They kind of have like a unique purpose that they fulfill, and there is no workarounds for it. And I don't really think that they are that inefficient. So, but I don't know for sure. Then we have clear. Clear, this guy is going up to A tier. So the reason I'm throwing this guy in A tier, which might confuse you, is clear 0. So what you can do is you can clear a count of 0 of an item, and this is a good way to detect if somebody has an item over MBT equals. A lot of times doing a execute store, result score, run clear, and then putting a item that it tries to clear and making the count of that item 0, just to say like, oh, does somebody have this item? That will often be a lot more efficient than the MBT equals, where you check if they have it in their MBT. So clear is actually really cool for detecting stuff, and it also is able to access items that are not in the inventory but in your hand. So clear can clear items that you have clicked on, which is nice. Now, how does that speak to its efficiency? I mainly just put it high because it's able to replace some inefficient stuff such as MBT. In terms, well, I'll throw it down to B. I'll throw it down to B because you are modifying players' data, but it's better than just okay because of its interaction with other commands. Then finally, data modify storage. This guy is going up. I'm going to throw it at A tier just because data modify storage is a lot more efficient than data modify entity. Data modify storage, you can do a ton of them without noticing any difference or any issues with lag, because you're just modifying MBT that's in a stored location, and you're modifying one thing's MBT, and it's a lot more efficient. I'm edging on the B tier here, but I'm going to throw it to A just to highlight the difference between it and data modify entity and how much better it is than doing that. So learning storage is actually a very valuable kind of thing to know. All right, so that's the tier list. If you have any complaints, then go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'm sure it'll be pretty controversial as to what I put here, and everybody's going to have their own experience with what they found is better than other things. So I'm sure plenty of you guys are going to come up with your own tier list organizations, and I'll actually include all the pictures that I used here. Like, I'll include all the assets here, I think, in a zip file in the description if you want to put together your tier list and share them on the Discord. If you want to just hop on and show me what you think of the tier list and what should be changed, or you can just take a picture of this end screen and kind of draw X's on things you don't agree with. Other than that, guys, that's it for today. Kind of a fun, different kind of video to do. But if you like that, leave a like. Make sure you check out the sponsor if you are in need of a server. And see you next time. Peace.